Hey everybody, here we are at chapter 12 of the Count of Monte Cristo, numbers 34 and 27. Dantes passed through all the various stages of misery that affect a forgotten and forsaken prisoner in his cell. First there was pride born of hope and a consciousness of his innocence. Next he was so reduced that he began to doubt his innocence. Finally his pride gave way to entreaty, yet it was not God he prayed to, for that is the last resource, but man. The wretched and miserable should turn to their Savior first, yet they do not hope in him until all other hope is exhausted. Dantes begged to be taken from his dungeon and placed in another one, even though that were deeper and darker. Even a change for the worse would be welcome and would give him a few days' distraction. He entreated his gaolers to let him go for a walk, to give him books, anything to while away the time. One day he entreated his gaoler to ask for a companion for him. The gaoler passed the request of prisoner number 34 to the proper quarter, but the governor, being as prudent as a politician, imagined that Dantes would stir up the prisoners to mutiny, weave some plot, or make an attempt to escape, so he refused. Dantes had now exhausted all human resources and turned toward God. All the pious thoughts which are sown broadcast in the human field, which are gleaned by the victims of a cruel fate, came to comfort him. He recalled the prayers taught him by his mother and discovered in them a hidden meaning hitherto unknown to him. To the happy and prosperous man, prayer is but a meaningless jumble of words until grief comes to explain to the unfortunate wretch the sublime language which is our means of communication with God. In spite of his prayers, however, Dantes still remained a prisoner. His gloom gave way to wrath. He began to roar out blasphemies, which made even his gaoler recoil in horror, and dashed himself in a paroxysm of fury against the walls of prison. Then there recurred to his mind the informer's letter which Villefort had shown him. Each line of it was reflected on the walls in fiery letters. He told himself it was the hatred of men and not the vengeance of God that had thrust him into this dark abyss. He doomed these unknown men to the most cruel torments his fiery imagination was capable of conjuring up. But even so, the most awful of these torments seemed to him too mild and too short for them, for after the torment would come death, and in death they would find, if not repose, at all events that insensibility to which nearly resembles repose. Sometimes he said to himself, "When I was still a man, strong and free, commanding other men, I have seen the heavens open, the sea rage and foam, the storm rise in a patch of sky like a gigantic eagle beat the two horizons with its wings. Then I felt that my ship was but a weak refuge from the tempest, for did it not shiver and shake like a feather in the hand of a giant? Soon the sight of the sharp rocks, coupled with the frightful noise of the waves, announced to me that death was near, and death terrified me. I exerted all my efforts to escape it, and I combined all my man's strength with all my sailor's skill in that terrible fight against God. For to me life was happy then, and to escape from the jaws of death was to return to happiness. I had no use for death. I loathed the thought of sleeping my last sleep on a bed of hard rocks and seaweed, or of serving after my death as food for gulls and vultures. I who was made in the image of God. Now, however, it is quite a different matter. I have lost all that bound me to life. Now death smiles on me as a nurse smiles on the child she is about to rock to sleep. Now welcome death." No sooner had this idea taken possession of the unhappy young man than he became more calm and resigned. He felt more contented with his hard bed and black bread, ate less, slept not at all, and almost found his miserable existence supportable, for could he not cast it off as one will as one casts off old clothes? There were two ways of dying open to him. One was quite simple. It was only a question of tying his handkerchief to a bar of the window and hanging himself. The other way was by starving himself. Hanging seemed to him a disgraceful thing, so he decided upon the second course. Nearly 4 years had passed since he had taken his resolution. At the end of the second year, he ceased to count the days. Dantes had said to himself, "I will die," and had chosen his mode of death. He had weighed the matter well, but being afraid he might go back on his resolution, he had sworn to himself that he would starve himself to death. "When the gaoler brings me my food in the morning and evening," he said to himself, "I shall throw it through the window, and he will think I have eaten it." He kept his word. At first, he threw it away with pleasure, then with deliberation, and finally with regret. It was only the remembrance of his oath that gave him the strength to carry out his dreadful purpose. The food which he had once loathed, hunger now made pleasant to the eye and delicious to the smell. At times, he would hold his plate in his hand for an hour, his eyes fixed on the morsel of putrid meat or tainted fish in the black and moldy bread. It was the last instincts of life struggling within him and breaking down his resolution. At length came the day when he had no longer the strength to raise himself to throw his supper away. The next day he could no longer see and scarcely hear. The gaoler thought he was seriously ill. All at once, toward 9 in the evening, just as he was hoping that death would come soon, Dantes heard a dull sound on the wall against which he was lying. So many loathsome animals had made their noises in his cell that little by little he had grown accustomed to them and did not let them disturb his sleep. This time, however, whether it was that his senses had become intensified by his long abstinence, or that the noise was louder or more significant than usual, Edmond raised his head to hear better. And what he heard was an even scraping noise, as though caused by an enormous claw, a powerful tooth, or the presence of some sharp instrument on the stone. Though weakened, the young man's brain seized on the idea that is ever present in the mind of a prisoner: liberty. The noise lasted for about 3 hours. Then Dantes heard the sound of something crumbling away, and all was silence again. Some hours later, the scraping was continued again, but this time louder and nearer. Edmond's interest was aroused, and the noise seemed almost like a companion to him. As it continues even in daylight, he thought to himself, it must be some unfortunate prisoner trying to escape. Oh, if I were only near and could help him! But I must ascertain this. I have only to knock on the wall, and if it is an ordinary workman, he will instantly cease working and will endeavor to discover who it is that knocks and why he knocks, and then, as his work is lawful, he will soon resume it. If, on the contrary, it is a prisoner, the noise I make will alarm him. He will be afraid of being discovered. He will cease his work and only resume it at night when he believes everyone to be in bed and asleep. Edmond went to a corner of the cell, detached a stone that had become loosened with the damp, and knocked 3 times on the wall, just where the sound had been loudest. At the first knock, the noise stopped, as if by magic. Edmond listened carefully all through the day, but there was complete silence. It is a prisoner, Dantes said with an inexpressible joy. 3 days, 72 deadly hours passed without a repetition of the noise. When evening, however, after the gaoler had paid his last visit, Dantes, who had his ear to the wall, thought he heard an almost imperceptible sound. He moved away, paced around the cell several times to calm himself, and then returned to the same spot. There could be no doubt about it. Something was happening on the other side of the wall. The prisoner had recognized the danger of his previous tactics and had substituted the crowbar for the chisel. Encouraged by this discovery, Edmond resolved to help the untiring worker. He looked around for some object he could use as a tool, but could discover nothing. He had no knife or sharp instrument. The only iron in the cell was that at the windows, and he had already proved the impossibility of moving the bars. He had but one resource, and this was to break his pitcher and use one of the jagged fragments. Accordingly, he ditched the pitcher to the ground, and choosing 2 or 3 of the sharp, broken bits, hid them under his bed. The others he left scattered about the floor. The breaking of the jug was such a natural accident that it would cause no suspicion. He had the whole night to work in, but, groping about in the dark, he did not make much headway, and he soon found that he blunted his instrument against the hard stone. He laid down his tool and waited for the morning. Hope had given him patience. All night long he listened to the unknown miner at his subterranean work. Day came, the gaoler entered. Dantes told him the pitcher had fallen from his hands as he was drinking out of it the previous evening. The gaoler went grumbling to fetch another one without even taking the trouble to pick up the bits of the old one. The grinding of the lock in the door, which had always caused Dantes a pang, now gave him inexpressible joy. He listened for the last of the dying footsteps, and then, hastily moving his bed away, he saw by the faint ray of light that penetrated his cell how useless had been his work of the previous night in attacking the hard stone instead of the plaster surrounding it. The damp had rendered the friable, and Dante's heart beat with joy when he saw it break off in little bits. They were but tiny atoms, it is true, but within half an hour he had scraped away nearly a handful. A mathematician would have calculated that if he worked like that for about 2 years, and if he did not encounter a rock, he might succeed in excavating a passage 2 feet square and 20 feet deep. In 3 days he managed, with untold precautions, to lay bare a stone. The wall was made of ashlars, for the greater solidity of which a freestone had been placed at intervals. It was one of those freestones which Dantes had now laid bare, and which he must now dislodge. He used his nails, but they were useless tools. The fragments of the pitcher broke whenever he tried to make them do the duty of a crowbar. After an hour of useless toil, he paused, his forehead bathed in perspiration. Was he to be thus stopped at the beginning? And must he wait inert and useless while his neighbor, who was perhaps growing weary, should accomplish all? Suddenly, an idea occurred to him. He stood up, smiling, the perspiration on his forehead dried. The gaoler always brought him his soup in a tin saucepan with an iron handle. It was this iron handle he longed for, and he would have given 10 years of his life to get it. The contents of the saucepan were always poured into Dante's plate. As this, he ate with his wooden spoon and washed his plate in the readiness for the next day. On the evening in question, Dantes placed his plate on the floor, halfway between the door and the table. When the gaoler entered, he stepped on it and broke it to pieces. This time, the gaoler could not blame Dantes. It is true he should not have left his plate on the floor, but then, the gaoler should have looked where he was going. He contented himself with grumbling and looked around for some other vessel for Dantes' soup. "Leave the saucepan," the prisoner said. "You can take it again when you bring me my breakfast in the morning." This advice suited the gaoler, as it spared him the necessity of going up and down the many steps again. He left the saucepan. Dantes was trembling with delight. He ate his soup and meat hastily, and then, after waiting an hour to make sure the gaoler would not change his mind, he set himself to the task of dislodging the freestone using the saucepan handle as a lever. At the end of an hour, he had extricated the stone, leaving a hole of more than 1.5 feet in diameter. Dantes collected all the plaster very carefully, carried it to the corners of the cell, and, with a piece of broken earthenware, scraped some of the gray earth from the floor and strewed it over the plaster. He continued to work all night, and at dawn of the day replaced the stone, pushed the bed up against the wall, and lay down to sleep. His breakfast consisted of a piece of bread, which the gaoler placed on the table. "Aren't you going to bring me another plate?" Dantes asked. "No. You break everything. First of all, there was your pitcher, then you made me break your plate. You can keep the saucepan now, or your soup will be poured into that." Dante's eyes lifted up to heaven, joined his hands under the coverlet, and said a prayer of thanks. The piece of iron which had been left him created in him a feeling of gratitude toward God stronger than any he had felt for the greatest blessings in past years. He worked all day unremittingly. Thanks to his new instrument, he had scraped out more than 10 handfuls of broken stone, plaster, and cement by the end of the day. He continued working all through the night, but after 2 or 3 hours, he encountered an obstacle. The iron did not grip anymore, it simply slid off a smooth surface. He touched the obstacle with his hand and soon recognized it as a beam. It crossed, or rather blocked, the hole that Dantes had commenced. Now it meant that he had to dig either above or below it. "Oh, my God," he cried. "I prayed so fervently that I hope thou hadst heard my prayer. My God, after having deprived me of my liberty, after having deprived me of the peace of death, oh my God, and after calling me back to existence, have pity on me, oh my God, and let me not die of despair." "Who speaks of God and of despair in the same breath?" said a voice that seemed to come from under the ground and sounded sepulchral to the young man. His hair stood on end and he drew back. "Ah," he murmured, "I hear a man's voice." Edmund had not heard any man's voice but that of his gaoler for the past 4 or 5 years, and to a prisoner, a gaoler is not a man. He is but a living door added to his oaken door. He is not a bar of flesh, but he is but a bar of flesh added to his bar of iron. "In heaven's name," Dantes cried out, "speak once more, though the sound of your voice frightened me. Who are you?" "And who are you?" the voice asked. "An unhappy prisoner," replied Dantes, who had no difficulty in answering this question. "What nationality?" "French." "Your name?" "Edmond Dantes." "Your profession?" "A sailor." "How long have you been here?" "Since February 28th, 1815. "Your crime?" "I am innocent of any crime." But what are you accused of? Of having conspired in favor of the Emperor's return. What? The Emperor's return? Is the Emperor then no longer on the throne? He abdicated at Fontainebleau in 1814 and was banished to Isle of Elba. How long have you been here that you do not even know this? Since 1811. Edmond shuddered. This man had been in prison 4 years longer than himself. Dig no more, the voice continued, speaking quicker. Tell me only at what height your hole is. On a level with the floor. How is it concealed? It is behind my bed. Where does your room lead to? To the passage. And the passage? To the courtyard. Alas, alas, muttered the voice. Oh my God, what is the matter? Dantes cried out. Only that I have made a mistake, that the inaccuracy of my plans has misled me, that the lack of a compass has ruined all, that one wrong line on my plan is equivalent to 15 feet, and then what I believe to be the wall of the fortress is the wall you have been digging. But in any case, the fortress would only give you access to the sea. That is what I desired. And if you had succeeded, I should have thrown myself into the sea, swum to one of the islands around Chateau d'If, or even to the shore, and then I should have been saved. Now, all is lost. Fill in your hole again very carefully, work no more, and wait till you hear from me again. Tell me at least who you are. I am number 27. You surely mistrust me, cried Dantes. I swear by the living God that I will not betray you. Do not forsake me. You will not leave me alone anymore, will you? Come to me, or else let me come to you. We will escape together, and if we cannot escape, we will talk together. You of those you love, and I of those I love. You must love someone. I am all alone in the world. Then you will learn to love me. If you are young, I shall be your companion. If you are old, I shall be your son. I have a father who must be 70 years of age if he is still alive. I love him, but him and a girl named Mercedes. I know that my father has not forgotten me, but who knows whether she still thinks of me. I will love you as I loved my father. So be it, said the prisoner. Farewell till tomorrow. From this moment, Dantes' happiness knew no bounds. He was not going to be alone anymore, and perhaps he might even gain his freedom. Anyway, even if he remained a prisoner, he would have a companion, and captivity shared with another is but half captivity. He walked up and down his cell all day long, his heart beating wildly with joy. At moments it almost seemed to choke him. At the least sound he heard, he sprang to the door. Once or twice he was seized with fear that they would separate him from this man whom he knew not, but whom he already loved as a friend. Night came. Dantes thought his neighbor would take advantage of the silence and the darkness to renew conversation with him, but he was mistaken. The night passed without a single sound breaking in upon his feverish waiting. But the next morning, after the gaoler had been, he heard 3 knocks at equal intervals. He threw himself upon his knees. "Is that you?" he said. "Here I am." "Has your gaoler gone?" inquired the voice. "Yes," replied Dantes, "and he will not come again till the evening, so we have got 12 full hours of freedom." "I can set to work then?" "Oh, yes, yes, without delay, this very instant, I beg of you." The piece of earth on which Dantes was leaning suddenly gave way. He threw himself back, and a mass of earth beneath the aperture and a mass of earth and loose stones crumbled into a hole, which opened up just beneath the aperture he himself had made. Then from the bottom of this hole, of which he could not gauge the depth, he saw a head appear, and then a pair of shoulders, and finally the body of a man who crept with great agility out of the hole just made. All right, everyone, have a great day, and we will catch up with prisoners 34 and 27 another day.